Last session was about being your own captain on the team and how the team has a collective conscious of its own. Hi, Kau. Such a late hi. uh, so, with regards to being your own captain, so we pick captains because of the characteristics they show and because we think it's valuable to the team. Idea behind that is it so bad is if each person is their own leader or own captain in some ways, where they take conflict that they feel or emotions that they feel to themselves before taking it up for public resolution, sort of. So that was being your own captain. With regards to collective conscious, well, the idea is that whether you like it or not, there is a living set of shared beliefs over any set of people that come together with certain when they want certain outcomes, right? Like with regards to a team, all of us have some values, all of us know sort of where we want to finish or what we want to do. We have different personal goals and we have team goals. So when it comes to that, it's not just goals that we add, it's also everything as ourselves, right? So when we're there as a team, I can't say here Sangi is just as from DOD. I'm also taking all of me there, which means I have to be a little bit more conscious of what I'm choosing to add to the collective conscious. So with regards to that, I think the only I mean, the only thing I sort of said that was solid was be very intentional in what you add. I didn't really say what you can, what you can't add, whatever works for the team, but be intentional in it and set practices that can be implemented by individuals so that they're not lost when your team value is having fun. They know these are the ways in which I can have fun, and this is how I know, like, yeah, check check check, 4 or 5 things happened out of this 10 fun list thing, so I know I'm having fun. Some way of being accountable to the values and to the collective conscious. Today we'll be talking about mental toughness and what it means to be mentally tougher. So, skipping ahead. Okay. So the first thing I wanted to start with is mental toughness is something that a lot of athletes speak about, but to a certain extent, maybe what we are missing is that mental toughness is a process. And sometimes when we subscribe to the idea of wanting to be mentally tough, we sort of lose sight that it's not a product that we're aiming for, but a bunch of processes that we have to set in place so that we exhibit certain characteristics. Because mental toughness at the end of the day is not one thing, is but a bunch of characteristics that has been studied in athletes. So mental toughness as a theme, as a thought, was started with regards to studies in performance. So it was not even like okay, I don't want to say not even. How it started was like, hey, this player seems to be doing something extraordinary, and they seem to be making all the shots. Say if you're talking about basketball, and then we say, okay, let's find like 10 other people who seem to be making these extraordinary shots, and then they sort of studied their characteristics and said, okay, what are these things that are making them do these extraordinary things when there is pressure, when there is well, when they're being tested. Well, let me pause for a second. Thumbs up, questions, anything? I can't see. Are we good? Keep going? Okay. So, oh no, I stopped the screen share. Give me a second, sorry. Okay. So, with regards to mental toughness itself, right? As you can see, mental toughness is having the wow, that's too tiny for me. Hold on, sorry. I wanted to read out the definition, and I wanted to also tell you guys that out of like a 550-page textbook on sports psychology and exercise psychology, Mental toughness literally occupies 2 pages of that book, which is how recent and new this study is. So you might have some people starting to talk about this around 1960s, 65. So hold on. Okay, so it's defined as having the natural or developed psychological edge that enables you to A, generally cope better than your opponents with many demands that sport places on a performer, and specifically be more consistent and better than your opponents in remaining determined, focused, confident, and in control under pressure. Um, So that is the definition of mental toughness. So when we look a little bit deeper into how this study has started, right? This the first thing we need to ask when any sort of a psychological concept is sold to you, right? Is this relevant for me? Because with regards to psychology, while you might have all these overarching definitions and schools of thought and everything, at the end of the day, it's about how much you can internalize something for yourself and how well a system or practice will work for you. So the first thing with regards to mental toughness, we need to ask, is it relevant for me and in what context? Do I want to be mentally tough in life, at work, at home, right? So there are different ways where we can apply this. So here, obviously, the context being frisbee, it is important to a certain extent to be able to exhibit these characteristics, because when it comes to dealing with adversity in sport, mental toughness, compassion, humanity uh, are some of the things that we need when it comes to being resilient and facing those adversities, especially in sport, especially in team sport. So, as reported in multiple books and journals, mental toughness is often studied along with another variable. So, there are very, very few research papers that study mental toughness alone, because usually it's not a variable that that's there by itself. It is dependent on a bunch of other things that an individual needs to be able to do already in order to sort of bring all of it together and clump it together and call it mental toughness. Um, there's also a little bit of criticism when it comes to mental toughness, because here is a field that's grown purely on performance and need for performance. So any sort of research there is skewed towards who's the best performer or what they're already doing, but it's not really sort of extending the scope of study or trying to understand the processes that sort of bring this into practice. And so there's lesser research that is happening, more research, more repetitive study where they can get it tested in performance oriented situations. So moving on. Okay, so before we move on to this, I'm just going to go back, because this speaks of 12 characteristics that a mentally tough individual exhibits. I just wanted to go over what these prerequisites that that are sort of not prerequisites. What are these individual or other traits that are shown by individuals that are clumped together as mental toughness? So the first and foremost important, actually, why don't we try and take some guesses? I'm sure like we have some clue as to what is mental toughness, right? We can take some guesses. You can type it in. No, don't send screenshots. You guys want to take a guess on what goes into being a mentally tough human being? I'm sure you can draw from personal experience to a certain extent. Yes, thank you, Nandini. Being in control of your emotion, definitely that's there. So how I would see it is more than being in control of your yes, definitely control of your emotion, but also having the self-awareness to know which mood state or mental state you are in, so that you also know when to push and when not to push. Uh, Jacob says ability to withstand stress while performing. So yes, definitely. Um, so that I would say comes under like focus, attention, and obviously stress. Stress I would say comes under ability to transform or tolerate pain and transform conflict. Mindfulness, yes, definitely. It comes from self-awareness. It comes from internal locus of control. Resilience covered, yes, definitely resilience. So that is like resilience, grit. I just want to take one extra second. So resilience is maybe it could be more short term, it's more bounce back. Grit is sort of the long term definition of resilience, if that makes sense to all of you. So it's two slightly different things, but talking about similar characteristics. So any other stuff? So some more characteristics that are there is, well, the first thing is self-belief. If there is no self-belief in what you are doing, there is no mental toughness, because you will not, you will not go through the rest of the steps that are necessary to build this skill, right? So mental toughness or like all of these things, they are they can start off as coping strategies to adversity, or it could be just like the definition said, it could be sort of inborn or something that you always seem to have practiced for some reason. Um, well, so self belief is something that cannot be shaken. So it needs to be something that you truly believe in and in yourself. And that definitely comes from a lot more mindfulness, like Nandini pointed out. There needs to be, I'm not sure if you've noticed, but have you noticed athletes walking around like a higher than thou ego state? Like some athletes seem to be walking around that. Like, I'm not sure. I'm not saying they're trying to do it, but they just seem to come off that way, right? So that is also a key characteristic of mentally tough individuals. I mean, it's not in comparison or it's not in, hey, I'm better than you, but it's again, it comes from grounded self belief that whatever you are doing is absolutely like the best option, or only you can do it as well. Um, there's also desire, and without desire, I'm not sure how many of us will set practices where we can learn skills. And so yeah, desire is an important aspect. um, Pain, conflict transformation, we've spoken about it. And also motivation to perform, to learn, to fail. And internal locus of control. So when it comes to any questions on internal locus of control, I can give you an example, a food related example, if you guys don't take it personally. So say I'm trying to go on a diet and there's junk food on my table. I can either eat it and say, yeah, I ate it because I wanted to, even though I'm on a diet. Or I can say, you guys bought it, it was there, I saw it, I ate it, you are at fault. Sorry to make it so kiddish, but well, I just wanted to exaggerate the difference. Mm, let me see if I missed out anything else. So yeah, internal locus of control also ensures that the mentally tough individual is not affected by other people's poor or good performance, or like the state of their competition and things like that. So let's go back to, so it's a bunch of 12 characteristics, and I'm going to go back to the presentation for a second and see what else we need to do as individuals in order to sort of start training, or like what other prerequisites do we need as individuals. Hold on. Okay. Mm. So coming back to self-awareness, mindfulness, and desire and self-belief. So the athlete needs to have absolute faith in themselves, their methodology, in what they've tried to do, and in belief. Oh, so one more thing to add on to characteristics of mentally tough athletes. They also sort of identify what physical or mental skills they are lacking, and they have the ability to say, to sort of define the need for it, understand how, why, when they will use it, and how it will benefit them, and set practices to achieve it. So yeah, what are the characteristics are involved? Well, you need to have absolute faith and belief in self, and a great example of this and of a slightly larger than thou attitude is Muhammad Ali. and I'm sure all of us know why I'm talking about this. Like, he went through this phase of becoming world champion, then declaring his religious faith, and then being sort of shunned or sidelined because of that. And he faced a lot of hate in his early career and after his first world championship. So regardless, and he started off by talking a lot about himself and like building him up. And I'm sure you would have heard this whole uh I'm the best there is, or no, wait, what is the line? I can't remember. Anybody remember the line? You can share it with me. But there's a lot of self talk in the way that he expressed. There was a lot of self belief that just came through, even in the way he spoke about himself and how great he was, and how there was nobody else that could beat him. And he actively also heckled other competitors. So, well, anyway, that's a tidbit, I guess. The other thing that you need, other characteristics that are involved, is that you need to have a sense of internalized context and purpose. Without context, purpose, it is really hard to sort of put a plan to it, right? You can't put your pen to paper and answer a bunch of questions without having these two in place. So the athlete, we assume, when they seek mental toughness or when they're practicing mental toughness, they already have this context and purpose sort of cemented. And the other thing that also needs here is empathy. If an athlete can practice self empathy, they will find it easier to go on the path of mental toughness, because when it comes to mental toughness, learning new things, self betterment, there is obviously going to be failure to a certain extent. We'll come back to that later, but which is why self empathy or is important. So, coming down to how do we take a step in the direction of mental toughness or building mental toughness? So, in the earlier studies, I'd mentioned how mental toughness was always studied in comparison with or in association with another characteristic, usually, say, grit, or it could be attention, mindfulness, locus of control. So these different variables that also go along with mentally tough individuals, just to see, like, how high is the correlation or something like that. So they'll say, oh, grit is very important, is more important in mental toughness than internal locus of control. So that's the kind of research that's been happening. So when we sort of understand that mental toughness is not a single variable by itself, but a bunch of things grouped together, this sort of is missed by popular culture, products that are made so that they can sell mental toughness, and users that also subscribe to this to a certain extent. Because on the other side, and this is where I feel like a lot of this is missed, is self-compassion is a key aspect in providing the balance to mental toughness, because mental toughness is a desire or this need for self-betterment in something that you find purposeful and in a context that you understand. So when it comes to this, it's important to be able to set up experiential learning areas for ourselves, right? It can be physical or mental, but places where we learn with experience, where we reframe failure, what it means to fail, and the shame that we associate with it, right? So I'm sure to an extent we have to talk to ourselves and say, hey, don't feel shame at that disc that you've just dropped. And it doesn't, like, and you're always going to feel it, right, at some point. But does that affect your ability to perform in that game or in the next, as soon as play defense, how fast can you pick up your person after your a turnover could also, all of those will the reaction time, well, I guess the point is the reaction time of how long it'll take you to go back and play defense should be lesser if you are working on your mental toughness skills. So, and yeah, so it helps us learn from these failures and not just see it from a perspective of doubt, pity, disappointment, or anger. And usually individuals who are mentally tough have the capacity to show self compassion to themselves and therefore continue on their goal or continue exhibiting characteristics of mental toughness. So just because this doesn't mean mentally tough individuals or athletes don't fail, it just means they are okay with it, or they understand it's part of performance, and they're looking for ways in which they can do their job without letting this affect them. um, so what happens when you develop mental fitness? So I'd like to think when you become more mentally tough, not fitness, toughness. When you become more mentally tough, you will put yourself in more of these things called flow state. A flow state is it's basically you're totally absorbed in what's happening right then, right there. You know it's not your regular state of performance or functioning. You have a sense of heightened attention at what needs to happen, and you know exactly what you need to do even without thinking about what you need to do. So it feels like all of it, all the things that you need, and the task itself, just like it's laid out in front of you to just go pick up and do, even though it could be one of the toughest things, or it doesn't matter, like the nature of toughness, all of those things at this point of time doesn't matter. But usually when you are challenged and when you are made to go out of your comfort zone, those are the times where you also experience this what well we've called here optimal subjective experience, where the cognitive cost of the user is very, very low and the reward is very, very high. So what goes into this flow state is knowing exactly what one is going to do, how one is going to do this, having a sense of oneness with what needs to happen. I'm not sure if you've had these moments where you feel like you are the disc and the disc is you, and all you need to do is, like, turn on that switch and turn off your mind, enable to in order to go do what your sort of instinct is telling you. And I don't know if there is a better way to describe it, or you can, well, if you've experienced it, we can talk about it at some point. And then feeling in absolute control of self. And this also came up with regards to mental toughness. So the self control is a key aspect in this. We've spoken about all of the other things. So I have a small graph here that talks about, that tries to show flow, apathy, boredom, anxiety, and how those happen. So on the vertical axis you have challenge, low and high. When there is low challenge, then there's boredom and there's apathy. When there's high challenge, there could be anxiety or flow, and these are all not as segmented as it looks on this representation, obviously. And when I'll come back to this, my bad. And then on the horizontal axis we have skills, low and high. When you have low skills and high challenge, you have anxiety. When you have low, it could lead to anxiety, or it could lead to behavior which is acted out through anxiety, through the filter of that, maybe. So let's talk about it that way. When you have low skills and low challenge, you become apathetic. And when you have high skills and high challenge, you get into this flow state. Does this mean an athlete who's entered flow state just stays there every time? Does it mean they will be able to, sort of snap their fingers and bring it back? Well, some athletes believe yes, they can sort of call on this feeling or call on this trait for them to deliver. Some people think it's more natural. However, there is one thing that's come out of this. Once you experience this state, and yes, this is something, it might sound like voodoo at some point, but once you experience it, you will start experiencing it more and more frequently, if you identify what are those things that brought you to this state of flow for yourself. So with regards to mental, okay, let's see, what am I missing? Yeah, okay, so going back to this, what happens when you develop MT? What happens when you develop MT practices that are not sustainable? So then that would lead to burnout of an athlete. And I think maybe that we can go back into it later, or we can take questions as to what is burnout. But I think we understand the use. And then coming back to this chart of flow, I'd like to quickly connect this to the collective conscious thought we were exploring. So if you were to take your team, right, team members, and sort of project them on this graph, you will come to figure out like where our team lies, and that maybe the average of that, or depending on the social importance given to leaders and individuals, sometimes team can, they can be influenced by how many people think how many things, or how strongly somebody feels a certain thing in one of these aspects, which is where it comes back to being which is where we come back to being very intentional about what we add to this collective conscious of ours. um I've run out of thoughts. Any questions, any comments? Maybe it'll help me come back to something.
Yeah, Sangi, I just wanted to understand. So when we're talking about self-belief,
Mm-hmm.
I think I mean, like you
Sorry.
said, there are certain set of athletes who already kind of have that, and I think especially when you're new and like you said, when you are low on scale and you have like high anxiety, how would you suggest that one can actually, practice
Correct.
self-belief?
Thank you. So, thank you. Great question, because it leads me back to this whole thing of sort of collective conscious. So, each of us as individuals, right? Each of us have our own learning experiences, ways of processing things, and um, all these different characteristics that we've established that everybody comes with. So when that is happening, it's easier to say, hey, as a team we are going to be self believers, right? And then it's easier to set practices through that collective conscious, and that collective conscious can have an influence on the individual for their own self betterment with regards to self belief. But when they buy into the team is also setting expectations, saying, hey, we are self believers, so when you come do this, this is what it is. So, because like individual facilitation of this, right? Even for a captain, is very hard to go check in individually and say like, "Hey, where are you with regards to this right now?" Right? And that's again going back to the amount of maybe sometimes emotional work captains here do, or captains in general do. Ideally we want to lessen their burden, and burden is also when you have to individually go check in with everybody and say like, how are you feeling and all of those things. I feel like I'm coming off without compassion for teammates, but that's not the point of it.
No, I think
uh,
what I was trying to understand is as an individual, what can we do? Yes, as a team, I understand what you said. That I think that's a great area to kind of get everybody on the same page to kind of say, okay, this is how we're going to be. So, but as an individual, for somebody who's coming in like, completely new, scratch, so how could or what could they do to kind of make sure that that is something that they go back to?
okay. So with regards to life, right? If this is self belief that you're looking for in life or in other places, then, and if you're even pursuing sport or ultimate frisbee professionally, then I would say talk to a performance counselor, or take help from somebody who's knowledgeable, who can also deliver it according to how this individual needs. But when it comes to setting your own practices, where it can start is, again, it's hard for an individual to say, I don't have self belief, I need self belief. So it's easier when it's set into practice. So small things like, I'm thinking of an example, say like, so you normalize like throwing away the disc, or you normalize dropping a catch, and not normalize where you say, yeah, it's, you drop how many ever you want, it's okay. But you tell them, hey, when you drop a catch, these are things you will and you will not do, which will sort of align them in the direction of more self belief, or put them in a place where the teammates can sort of support and lend some of that self belief from the collective conscious. because at times there will be highs and lows even in the way that you are playing, right? So with regards to that, there's always this, it's not just what you are adding, it's also what you can take from the collective conscious when you need it. But personal self-belief, I think simple practices that that starts with you, I don't know, just start thinking about what your belief systems are built up of. I think that would give you an insight into where it's breaking down or where it's building up and it's beneficial with regards to self-belief.
Cool. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Jacob.
So yeah, you spoke about mental toughness and how it is an individual skill or an individual state of mind, and but how where's the anchoring point where it connects to, let's say, the team's shared conscious, so that for example, I mean, I'm convinced that I'm a good player, I know what I do on the field, but also the captain or the coach will, for example, give you instructions in case the game is not going well or they want to adjust something, or you see that another player is doing something that is not right in your opinion, but also you should trust the other player that they have their decisions made. And how would you say, how can your personal mental toughness merge into some team mental toughness or something?
Yeah. So that's why this is such a specific thing, and very, very few people seem to be exhibiting this very well, right? So somebody who's already mentally tough and is exhibiting all of these things, it's probably going to be a tough conversation to have with them because of all of these characteristics that they already possess, and because of all these self-beliefs, that systems that are grounded and that are feeding into them. And probably they're also a good player. So when it comes to that, that's where maybe we'll have to appeal to the self-compassion side and see if this is something that can be extended to the team. When it comes to, again, same point as self-belief, when it's easier to get collective consensus and feel power in mass. So even if I feel really low one day, if four of my teammates or three of my buddy group members come and say something, right, that sort of gives me perspective and helps me think about what's going on. So when it comes to collective conscious, where we're being intentional about everything we add, we are also going to take some time to say, um, to process that thought and then add it to the conscious. It's not that you're not asking for help, it's not that you're not expressing your anger. So what could possibly happen is this imaginary mentally tough athlete could either get frustrated and express themselves on the field, or they could say, how can I help my teammates, or they can say, okay, I got to go find another place where I can compete to my level. So different, like different choices that a person can take depending on the context and how involved they are there. So yeah, I'm not sure if I answer your question. Did it answer your question?
Yeah, almost. I mean, we're out of time, so we should maybe just rejoin the meeting and
Another minute.
Yeah,
I can aim for like 100 words.
well, okay.
Okay.
No, actually, no, it's fine. Yeah, I think it's a good answer. But so mental toughness doesn't mean that you take your values always as absolute, but you can, I mean, you can also accept criticism or modifications to, for example, your personal attitudes instructed by a coach or something, and still be mentally tough, right?
Definitely. And that's where, like, mentally tough athletes, they don't, it's not a state they reach and they just stay there, right? And just like how you saw on the graph, you could be in a place where suddenly the challenge is increased and you don't have the skills to match it. So whereas you were in the flow state, now you've fallen behind into the anxiety state. So it's a constant process of finding the thing that is not letting you unlock that potential. So yes, mentally tough athletes are self-aware and they're mindful and all of those things, right? And with they're not, yeah, they're not. I mean, when I said larger than thou ego state, it's just there, it's about their self-belief. The larger than thou attitude, it comes from grounded belief, and it comes from having some sort of it comes from some realistic knowledge or experience where they've seen themselves perform a certain way, or even having experienced this flow state. That doesn't mean these mentally tough athletes will also come with this thing of you only need to do it my way, or it doesn't mean they need to interact with the same arrogance that they have about their own self image with everybody else. They are definitely open to learning, and they're very, very adaptable. And if it's seen as a challenge or a threat to performance and self betterment, like it just they have the ability to pinpoint, to say, hey, this is the thing that needs to be done, and pick up the skills to get it done.
Hey, Sangeetha.
Yes.
Hi.
Yeah. Hi.
Sometime earlier you spoke about practices to seek mental toughness and it leading to a burnout. Could you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yeah. So as I see it, right, most athletes are very, very good at self-compassion, and that's the not so glorious flip side of the coin that is not spoken about when people promote mental toughness. So sometimes when you pick up habits that are not sustainable to yourself, and it need not be like, it could just be trial and error sometimes, where you say, hey, I need to do this, I need to do that, and you could have a thought and you follow it. But when the cost of pursuit of that betterment is little higher, or it's not what you expect, or there are more say factors that you did not take into consideration, or if your sense of self belief is shattered at some point, to be very dramatic, or is challenged and things like that, then athletes could go towards burnout, where they feel like, this is all pointless, I don't know why this is happening, I don't want to play anymore. And burnout could also be it need not be something the athlete recognizes immediately. It could be something that just like small changes in attitude and how they think about the game, and the time they spend and things like that. So if it becomes a little less enjoyable, the training becomes a little bit more tiresome, and waking up in the morning gets a little bit harder each day. So yeah, burnout can happen in those ways. It can happen with just overtraining, saying I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do it now, and not giving yourself space to sort of set those processes, those learning practices in place. So those are also unsustainable ways of trying to learn a new skill.
Cool, thanks.
Hey, hi, Sangi. Sorry, I got muted off in the middle. I had a question. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So could you throw some light on empathy and mental toughness when it comes specifically to a team which has probably got a couple of players who are, slightly higher on the mental toughness, and given the fact that they have these characteristics already embedded within them, they might have a few goals or a few targets in every single game, tournament, or a particular time period. How important do you think is empathizing with other players in this particular situation? Could you throw a little bit of light on that?
So it's extremely important, because like, again, when we are talking about mental toughness on one side, and how the balance on the other side is self-compassion. So there, that, and I've said self-compassion and not self-kindness, because kindness can be just exhibited without any deeper understanding or knowledge, but compassion comes with the understanding that there has been some sort of a suffering or pain. And compassion also comes from having felt this, or relating to this to a certain extent. So this self compassion that mentally tough athletes show, that can that is sort of extended to their teammates with regards to, it could be just simple things. So I'm sure, like, if you have these certain mentally tough athletes, you can watch them for the way that they do certain things, whether if they throw away the disc and they're not apologetic about it, right? Or yeah, just simple things like that. Those things can be taken and set into practice as team culture. So maybe not everybody will understand all aspects of mental toughness, but they will at least understand the aspect of what it means to bounce back on the field when there's a turn.
Thank you.
So I guess maybe what I'm trying to say is, like, because we have all these big definitions and like themes that we're sort of exploring when it comes to psychology, and it's so much individual, if we can set these tangible practices where psychology is not just everything that happens inside your mind, which you cannot touch or feel, if you can write it down, that becomes a sort of a validation. If you say it to your teammates, that's another sort of a validation. And all of these things help you in achieving your goal of, Madhu, this is also for self belief. So all of these things, just even acknowledging the need to pick up these skills and writing it down, and all of those things will help you remember it a little bit better, recall it, and practice it. Because to practice, you need to remember first that, this is what you need to do, and then you need to be able to learn that skill so you can practice it. Any other questions? Gaurav, you wanted to say something?
No, I was actually in agreement with what you just said, because not many of us are actually exposed to topics such as this. We might probably not go into the depth of the psychology aspect, and on field it's even more different, right? I mean, so people who probably are well read on the subject, or probably inherit some of these characteristics, uh, one can either have conversations with them, learn from their behavior, or validate it in any possible way. But the like the topic, I mean, which you are conducting today, is about teams' mental toughness in whole. So I was just trying to grab a few attributes that one can pass on, both from a theoretical perspective and a practical perspective.
Yeah. So, well, with regards to mental toughness, there's like, we listed a bunch of these characteristics, and like, one place that a lot of us need a lot of help with is dealing with failure, dealing with the shame that comes with failure. That's the big chunk of it. It's not even the failure itself, it's how we process it, it's how we think other people are going to process it, and what we think the cost of it is. So if we can sort of, reduce the mental burden or the cognitive cost of each failure, then the athlete themselves will be open to learning from those instances. So it's not, they don't have to work through the thoughts of, like, let's take like two different thought process of two different individuals that we're making up. So one could be like, again, comes from self doubt. Oh, I've dropped it, can I catch the next pass? I haven't trained enough, I'm not doing enough, I need to do more, all of these thoughts. Whereas all of these thoughts carried back onto the field right after that pass is probably not going to help that person recover from what's already happened. Whereas they're still processing shame from what happened. Now the game has actually moved on, and they need to be, again, be sort of in the moment and clear of all of these emotional costs that they're carrying to be able to perform their best.
Yep, that's a good example. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah.
I have another question, unless you don't want to go on or something with other topics. Okay.
Go on.
So maybe because I think it's a relatable example, and I would like to know how you perceive that situation when we as Saints team were at what was it again, regionals in Bangalore. There was like one time when we had an important game, and you started actually taking control of I don't know, how we would substitute and what tactics we would play. And I felt, and one important thing that you said was that we should not give each other instructions for improvement on the field or off the field. But if there was anything important we felt, we should talk to you, and you would convey it to the players or tell it on the line. And my question is, so for me, it felt like in a way you were sort of trying to cocoon the players into at least a minimum level of self-confidence, because when you're on the field, there's no chance to make up for practice sessions you missed or stuff like that. So what were your thought processes behind implementing this way of communicating within the team and putting us on the line? I mean, I have some clues and some ideas, but it would be cool to know it, because that's a common situation for teams.
If I were joking, then I would say maybe I like being a dictator. But the rational part of it is exactly what you said, which is it's not really, I mean, I don't want to define it this way, but you need to give a lot more thought about what you want to omit than what you want to add. Because when you add everything to the player, right, we are sort of overwhelming them with so much information that it's not going to help them. And as a coach, with regards to at least that game, I had a sense, and that was against Airbenders, Neo, I think. But yeah, but like I could get a sense of how the team was communicating and where their compass was with regards to their motivation and their self-belief. And when you start noticing how players are interacting, right, yes, we want to create a collective conscious where everybody wants to is very mindful of everything that they add, and they're their own captain. But I guess this also addresses the people management part of it, right? When you can't, well, without giving your players the agency to be mentally tough, you cannot ask them to be mentally tough, because that does not empower that player to say, yes, I can do this. It sort of becomes a barrier saying, oh, I already don't know this, I don't understand this, how can I just pretend like I have this and get away? And when it comes to when it came to that team and that game especially, we were fine as long as we weren't like, I thought we were processing a lot of that game then and there, and that wasn't really necessary because we're not really going to do anything crazy different with all the learning that we're picking up then and there. But that cannot be ignored, that needs to be stored for later, where we have more time, less emotion, so that we can get the full benefit of that awareness or of that experience.
Okay, thanks. So it's mostly about this self-processing, because, or not, sorry, this processing and this self-consciousness on the field, because in that very situation, when you're under pressure, it won't help you to question yourself. It just makes yourself vulnerable, right?
Exactly. And I can't come and tell you, hey, you already feel like shit. You can only say positive things. The easiest thing as a coach I could do there was to ask you to omit that and keep it to yourself, which itself is, which needs the player to show a lot of intentionality with regards to what they're saying, because now they can't say a bunch of things and they know coach is watching. So
Hi,
yeah,
Madhu.
Yes?
Do we have another 5 minutes?
Yes. Go ahead.
Hey, Sangeet. So another question.
Yeah.
So we've spoken about on-field situations, and covering athletes, teams, and so on. I just wanted to throw out another scenario and just share your thoughts on this. I'm audible, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what about mental toughness when it comes to off-field scenario? Bullying, public shaming, people going through traumatizing experiences.
Yeah.
Any Yes, I believe you found something funny there.
No, I was just like, not funny. It's well, it could be a great agency to learn mental toughness for somebody who's going through such a situation, because well, it is developed as a coping mechanism sometimes. um but is it necessary for them to develop it that way? I would have to challenge that, and say maybe there are more compassionate ways of teaching mental toughness. But Gaurav, with regards to the off-field side of it and how we stay aware of what we add to the collective conscious, I think you'll have to come back and listen to me again.